Okay, so I'm going to do an episode here about the what I call a concept map, and what I'm trying to do here is build an image that is kind of a representation of all possible conscious thoughts, what I would call specifically linguistic thoughts. I think there's something that happens when we move from a visual image or an intuition. Once we name that intuition, or once we put, it's almost like there's a new format that our brains use when we jump from the symbolic, from the imagistic, from the intuitive to language. When the psychotechnology of language was invented, it allowed our brains to think in a completely different way than has happened before. And I'm sure there's all kinds of interesting things that somebody more familiar with the evolution of our psychology could say than I can. But suffice it to say, I think there is a way in which language allowed us to think more fine-tuned about things, more where we can divide things up into very, very specific things, and have where that emotion of certainty comes online perhaps more often. Actually, that's an interesting thought. It's possible that that emotion of certainty began taking over for the right brain processes more often once we did get to a more abstract level of linguistics, which I'm not sure. I'm ranting. Sorry about that. The unconscious, of course, had its own form of abstraction in the form of archetypes, but to be able to name an archetype something, to think of it that way, and to form an entire abstract hypothesis about our metaphysics is something I don't think was possible until language and the syntax of language and then the logic of the syntax of language were evolved, something like that. Okay, that is all supposed to be something like an introduction to this image. So what I'm trying to do here, and this is an image that has evolved over a long time. I guess I'll start at the bottom right quadrant, or rather bottom right corner of the picture, which is four circles and a green triangle. And the idea here...
Just a sec.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can only see you.
You can only see me? Yeah, that's going to happen because I'm recording directly off of my screen. So can you open my image up in Google Docs and like just kind of follow along with me? Is that doable?
Yeah, can you hear me right now?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Cool. Okay, so are you good then?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So I wanted to bring attention to this first so that there's as little confusion as possible, I suppose. And in fact, I haven't updated this yet. I should have updated it first. Oh well, never mind. The unconscious is this dotted line down below. Then the yellow line should be around here, and I haven't included it. And I'm calling that the subconscious, or the what I call connective consciousness, which is what I'm using to describe intuitions. So all the mechanisms of intuitions, the ways we can do skills without defining how we do them. We just do them. In fact, if we try to think about it, we often can't do it as well, unless you're the kind of person who has to have a kind of abstract concept when you're doing something physical and skilled. But it's interesting because I find at least that I have skills I didn't even realize I did. This is just random, but I was holding a towel to dry my hair off recently, and I did this thing where I was holding the towel like in my hands like this, and then I rolled my thumbs to get my hands right in the middle, and it was just completely unconscious, and I did it in a matter of like a second, and I just and I had the towel right there. Now I don't remember consciously having that skill. It's just some random skill my brain was able to develop over time without me realizing. When I had a demand, and my mind was like, okay, how are we going to solve that? And I developed this tool, and I didn't even think about that process. I didn't try to do it. I just had a goal, and my brain reciprocated by developing that goal. And it took a long time for me to suddenly realize, wow, what did I just do with my hands? So anyway, that is all connective consciousness. It is things that we're conscious of in the sense that we are conscious of something like a memory, something that kind of flashes into our awareness. But the unconscious itself, I'm suggesting, is all the machinery that goes on behind the subconscious that doesn't directly interact with our awareness. And then language consciousness, of course, has all kinds of roots in all those others, but they're not directly like tied together. They can float apart. They can work separately, or at least I suspect they can. And then the final circle, okay, the green diamond is what I call the human or the social. And the reason I have that separate, even though it is as rooted in all these other layers, is to recognize the fact that sometimes we think about things separately from the social. So for instance, we abstract, our science is often abstracted from the social. We're actually trying to get as far away from the social as we possibly can when we're dealing with a social, when we're trying to deal with a scientific structure, because we don't want bias and other things like that. So we build these elaborate testing situations so that the human has as little interaction with the process as possible, something like that. And that's why the green diamond does not fully, that's why it's not a circle, so that there are areas that do not include the social. And then the story floating up top, I think that's kind of how our brain forms a gestalt of all the other aspects of our minds and lives in order to describe what's going on. So in the story would be your self-identity and your worldview, and little axioms like what comes around goes around, and cast your bread upon the waters, and in many days they will come back to you. These are things that form the way we see our paradigmatic view of the world, is what I'm saying that the story is. So now I have to zoom this out. That didn't help. Fit. Okay. Shoot. Okay. Well, good enough. All right. So there are 4 smaller circles around the edges of, and I'm in the big central image now. There are 4 circles that are the singular, the now, the holistic, and the logical. And these correspond, I think, very well to the 4 faculties in Jung and in the Myers-briggs, which are thinking, sensing, intuiting, and feeling. The idea that here is the reason these are not in the circle is because they are faculties. Now, of course, we will have models of those things in our mind, because this blue circle I'm showing here is a map of all our conscious thoughts, all the ways we are naming things. And then, of course, the yellow would be below that, even though I didn't draw it. And those are the intuitions trying to push up and emerge into our linguistic our linguistic consciousness. Okay. So these are faculties. The singular and the holistic are probably going to be the strangest looking, but I think these map correctly to the Jungian model. But the idea here is that we have a way in which we focus. We have 2 orientations to the world. One is to look at the parts of things and to the parts of the whole that is everything. And so we see a rock, or we see a person, or we see a rabbit, or whatever it is we're seeing. Those are singulars, and then we can expand that out and start looking at the parts of that. The foot of the rabbit, the teeth, can expand that out. The cells, expand that out. The atoms, expand that out. The quantum quantum, yeah, that stuff. Then the other orientation is the holistic. And so this becomes not only, well, the rabbit is a part of a circle of life, but it is also a part of, there becomes a point at which you begin talking about the patterns of the patterns. So the mind develops these patterns of all things social, all things physical, all things skill related, all things psychological, and then, once you have those patterns, I think the mind also steps back from that and starts looking for patterns that resonate together from those patterns, and that's where the archetypes emerge, something like that. So that's why if you read, the reason holistic is feeling is because if you are driven by your feelings, then part of those feelings are going to be rooted in those archetypical structures, the ways, in a sense, it's your story. On the map down in the subconscious is the unconscious story, and the unconscious story is going to have a great deal of its roots in your story, or rather, the story has a great deal of roots in the unconscious story. Because when you see a story and it resonates with you, like when you convert to something, you convert because there's actually something deep into your unconscious story that is looking for a response within the consciousness, in your linguistic consciousness, and you grasp onto that, and that becomes a part of your story. Logic is intuiting, because intuiting, actually, according to Jung and Myers-Briggs, is not your intuition, but it is more like your ability to abstract. So from left to right on this diagram, you're becoming progressively abstracted. From middle to top, you're going down to the singular. From middle to bottom, you're going into more and more holistic systems. And the idea is that everything in this circle, this blue circle at least, is something, a potential conceptual linguistic map, conscious map. So if you're in the bottom left quadrant, okay, I'll talk about the quadrants. I'm so messy when I talk about this. Oh well, maybe I'll get better. Okay, I should point something out. So I've tried to map procedural, propositional, participatory, and perspectival in the 4 quadrants of this blue circle. So you can think about the blue circle as, in Parallax, if you want me to just slow the heck down and ask some clarifying questions, please interrupt, because I'm going really fast through all this. So you have these 4 quadrants, and it's kind of like a Venn diagram, only instead of circles overlapping, they have hard lines. And I'm not necessarily saying there is a hard line there, that there's no bleed over, but I'm trying to say something like there is a difference between these, and you can locate something on either side, or maybe somehow in between, but I'm drawing them as separate. So anyway, participatory, perspectival, procedural, propositional, these are the 4 types of knowing that John Vervaeke talks about in his series. I've tried to map them onto this, and I don't know if it works. It kind of works, and I'll explain how in just a second, but I'm not sure it does, and I just wanted to point that out. Oh my gosh, I'm going so fast. I'm so sorry. I had too much coffee earlier, and it's affecting my delivery. I don't usually drink coffee. Okay, so there are singular to holistic. That's one way these quadrants are defined. Then the other is the specific, which is the now, the sensing, and the general, which is the abstract. So that means the top left is a combination of your specific, since it's coming from the singular, and your singular, since it's coming from the now, which is like what you are sensing in the now, whether it's thoughts that are happening in your brain or data coming through your senses. So you have the specific singular, you have the general singular quadrant, then down below you have the specific holistic, and you have the general holistic. So if I have a model for something I'm doing, no, I shouldn't go into that, sorry. I shouldn't go into that yet. So then not only, go for it, please, slow me down.
It seems that the procedural between thinking and sensing is connected to direct mechanics and direct cause and effect. Then the propositional would be, but the procedural would be like it would be particulars, like actual objects interacting, and you're sensing how they interact and trying to. And then propositional, you're saying, is like forms instead of particulars. Which
Yeah.
is like, what is the general concept of this interaction? So then the perspectival would be like. We'll go on from there.
Okay.
It makes sense to me.
Okay, good. I'll go into Vervaeke's way of using these terms real quick. So procedural is kind of like steps in a process. Okay, we do this, then we do this, then we do this. That is a type of knowing. We have a way of defining things by procedures, and I would argue that that's the way a logical argument often works. But a logical argument blends over into the propositional, which is our linguistic way of describing things. There's a sense in which I'm saying this entire blue circle is all propositional. Everything in the blue circle is propositional. And then the yellow would have participatory and perspectival in it. Again, it's not drawn, I apologize. And then I don't know what's in the unconscious. I have no idea what's in there.
The connective yellow be like context and perspective as for deriving meaning from something?
Context and perspective. So, perspectival, yeah.
So it would be like, is the glass half full or empty, but like the context is like, where are you in the desert? Or the perspective is like, how thirsty are you? So is it half full or half empty is a meaningless question until you take in context and perspective.
I think you've got it. I think that's probably one of the best actually descriptions I've heard of it. I'm pretty sure that's right. Whereas participatory is you're in action. You're physically doing the thing. So it maps pretty good, but I've got an intuition that I'm wrong somehow. I just haven't figured out how. So I've got these subquadrants of the quarters that also overlap. So that's why they're, these two ovals overlapping within the blue circle. So this top quadrant, or crescent, rather I should say, is the experimental crescent, and I call it that because we are working on a position of the propositional and the procedural, the specific singular and general singular, and we're trying to get more and more fine-grained. And in order to do that, we're testing things. This is random, but I remember just this morning, for some random reason, I had this memory of when I was like 3 or 4 years old, sitting in the front yard at the sidewalk and watching all these ants. And I saw the ants had antennae. And the antennae, what I knew antenna did is they send out waves of radio broadcasts, and they can be used as sensors, because that's what they were for on my Lego toys. They were sensors and stuff like that. So I made this assumption that, those are not feelers, because I had no concept of feelers. They're actually sending signals to each other. And for some bizarre reason, I decided to try to test that and see if that's right. So I started doing little things where I'd move an ant away from the others and see if the others could tell where it went through like some kind of radio broadcast or something. And finally I had to say, yeah, they're not broadcasting anything apparently. That's weird. But anyway, that's an idea of an experiment that is not as rigorous, say, as a scientific experiment. I'm trying by giving that example, I'm trying to show that this is not just science. This is things humans do even when they're 4 years old. The technical is something like the technical crescent, which is below the experimental crescent, is something like this is where I integrate the granular bits I've discovered into a way of functioning in real life. And so both of those crescents can interact both with the specific, like right now what I'm doing physically, and the general, which is like this abstract conceptual realm. In fact, at the top left and top right of the map, you'll see it says practical half and conceptual half, because I believe the whole left half of this circle is about practicality, is about the way our practice in real life emerges. And to continue on that, I have the top half is, I think, analogous to the left brain, and the bottom is analogous to the right brain. And I said left brain processing and right brain processing again because I'm not actually saying that this blue map, although maybe there are ways in which it maps onto the brain, I'm not saying it is the brain. I'm saying this is a map of our possible concepts. So the top half is something like all the thoughts we have that have been basically generated by left brain thinking, whatever left brain thinking is. We realize that the left and right hemispheres don't map perfectly onto our general concepts of left brain processing, right brain processing, but it maps good enough. Okay.
So, like sensing and thinking builds the map for intuition, and then intuition is the object of feeling and sensing.
Sensing and thinking builds the map of intuition.
So it's how we try to determine order in reality.
Oh, okay.
The map of it that we use for intuition, and then we use our feelings and our sensing from our intuition in order to act efficiently.
Interesting.
I would need a better description of the crescent, because you've got like the minimal and optimal crescents up top pointing.
Yes.
And I would think those would be operating from intuition, which is the right brain type stuff. The intuition, feeling, and sensing would be the right brain type activity, right?
Okay, so minimal and optimal are actually about epistemology. They are about how our models of reality work, because the right half is conceptual. So what I'm describing with minimal and optimal is something like necessary and sufficient. I'm not going to go into that because it's complicated, and I'm not very sure of what I'm talking about there. So instead, I'll describe this. So if you have a minimal grasp on, say, what an apple is, then you may have something like it's sweet, it's red, it's crispy, it's got a skin, all the parts. But that's very minimal. It's not. There's a combinatorially explosive amount of data even in an apple. There's the topological, on a microscopic scale, the topology of it. There's the atomic structures of it and the cellular structures. There are even all the social structures, the way we've created apple butter and apple pie. And there's all these there's even symbolic connections, which would be down at the lower quadrant of lower half into right brain processing, the way the symbolism of an apple plays its parts in religion. So what I'm referring to there is if you have a minimal idea of an apple, then it's just what your senses can tell you, or it might simply be what your senses tell you. If you have an optimal grasp, then you also know something like how to make apple butter, or how the symbolism of the apple works, or how to plant an apple tree, all these subsidiary ideas. Generally, what you do is you have a minimal concept that's kind of the core apple, what an apple is, and then you have this arrangement of other concepts that together make the optimal. So you have apple butter making, and you have symbology of the apple, and those are minimal forms also, but together you have an optimal grasp of the concept. That's the way I'm using it. Vervaeke uses optimal in a different way when he talks about optimal grasp. So I keep thinking I need to change that. But is that making sense?
Yeah, it's the question of meaning again. Like, so the intuition or categories we use can have context specificity. So there's a question that I was asked once that has stuck with me because they lost their minds in the way I answered it. The question was, copper and gold, true or false, copper and gold are similar because they are metals. And my answer was false. And they really didn't understand my answer, and it took me a long time to kind of try and describe it to them. But the problem is that copper or metals is our abstraction. Nature doesn't care about metals. Copper and gold are metals because they're similar, which is the opposite statement.
Oh, yes. It's a general concept. Is that what you mean?
For the purpose of, right, for a specific purpose, like if you're in electrical engineering or something, that might be a suitable substitution to say, hey, these are close enough that we could use this versus the other thing. Hey, let's coat our wires gold so that they don't corrode. That makes sense, right?
Okay.
But if you were in astronomy, a metal could be anything heavier than helium and hydrogen.
Oh, yes, I remember that. Okay. So,
but the similar is technically, from a logical, analytical point of view, not true. It's
right.
not as accurate, but it is very efficient for the purpose of conversation, especially if you think you're at least in the same context as the other person.
Okay. Let me see if I can clarify some stuff, because it sounds like you're seeing things shifted a little bit. So down here I have the intuitive crescent and the analogical crescent, and I have question marks by those because this is all right brain processing, and as much as I try to use my intuition, I find it very hard to really get down and define exactly what's happening on that scale. I've switched the analogical and intuitive back and forth several times, thinking, well, maybe this is the analogical and maybe this is the intuitive. But what I mean by analogical is something like, how do I describe this? Blah. Okay, let me jump to the left side of the image first. And there's two large triangles, dotted triangles. The top one says rigid categories and the bottom says overlapping categories. And I use categories, I should let you know, basically to mean concepts. I shouldn't go into it right now, but I have a weird reason for using categories and concepts as the same term. But anyway, what I mean by that is when we're getting down to the singular thinking, we are creating really rigid boxes that don't overlap. It's like the apple is not the orange, the left hand is not the right hand. But when we go to our holistic thinking, categories start blending together. The apple is like the orange, they're both fruit. The left hand is like the right hand, they're just mirror images of each other. So what is happening, going back to what you were saying about the sensing and the thinking create, I'm trying to remember what you said, the sensing and thinking create.
Essentially the basis for intuition.
The basis for intuition. That's interesting. So
categories, so there might be overlap.
Yeah, so what I think happens is our intuitions all come from, I think they all come from the right brain. So if you're right that our sensing and thinking create the basis for our intuitions, it's because the holistic is not just watching out there in the world, it's also observing what our left brain is calculating and doing. And it's going, oh, it's thinking that that's important, and it's saying that it looks like this. Well, then I think that the left brain and the right brain are both observing everything we do, and they're both encoding in their own formats. I don't know if that's accurate. I know that language happens on both sides of the brain, so I'm probably wrong about this, but my intuition strongly suggests that we have two formats in our brain. We have this singular, logical, linear. That's another term I don't have on this map for some reason, actually. I often call the singular the linear, or the singular linear, because it's the idea of when we get down granularly and scientifically, we are talking about these little points, and then we're taking these little points and we're putting them in a line to draw a conclusion. Whereas the holistic doesn't assemble, it just sees the whole, or at least believes it's seeing the whole. You know, when it says, okay, I think this is what the whole is, this is my paradigm, and this is how I will see the whole. Gosh, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
I think I think the sides do have different languages, so to speak, or at least there's some indication that there's communication. I think it's through the corpus callosum, like it's part of the brain if they separate it.
Yeah.
A person suffers from severe confabulations, which are lies that you don't know you're telling.
Yeah.
So if you separate this part of the brain, what happens is you can ask them a question like, hey, why are you in the hospital? And they'll answer the question, but it has nothing to do with reality whatsoever.
Yes.
Because the linguistic side and the other side are completely disconnected from each other.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Okay.
There's an apt analogy to what you're talking about, the singular versus holistic side too, in general systems theory.
Okay.
Essentially, the singular, as I said, would be the mechanical, and the holistic would be like, since you're working from intuition or the categories or whatnot, the formulations you've already made, essentially working from a statistical observation of what things fit where. And then the space in between would be general systems theory, which is like too complicated for singular mechanics, but not wide enough for statistics to work.
Okay. All right. That sounds hopeful, at least. Like I might be on the right track.
It sounds good.
Good. I've been, my first draft of this I did about 7 years ago, and it was 4 boxes stacked on top of each other, and this has gone through about 30 different iterations since then. So what have I not covered? I guess I haven't totally talked about the left crescents, the immediate and the practical. So the immediate, of course, is what is happening right now. I am talking on my headset, I'm making a video, and I have gestures I'm making, and I'm not necessarily consciously aware of why I'm making these gestures. I just have this social mechanism that's being engaged, that's causing my hands to gesture and gesticulate in these ways that is supposed to convey something to you. Although I'm not conscious at all of why I'm doing these actions. It's just happening. That kind of thing. Practical and skill gets a little more complicated because there are steps involved. That's something I should back up for a second. So one of the reasons I call the top in the top right quadrant these minimal and optimal crescents, and again the crescents extend all the way through the circle. They're not just in that quadrant. They're all the way up and down, left and right. In case that wasn't clear. So minimal, actually all the crescents on the outer edge of this map are all minimal. They are all kind of a minimal grasping of whatever is happening. A minimal grasping of a single point, a minimal grasping of a logical formula, a minimal grasping of some object you are holding right now, or a minimal grasping of some archetype or analogical structure. And then in more close to the middle, things get more complicated, which is why they're optimal. It's more of a collection of ideas. And so what happens there is you have the practical and the skilled are those things we've learned to do, like building a bridge or making a house or programming. And by programming there, I think I'm saying something more like not the concepts you're using. Maybe programming is all conceptual, but I wouldn't think so. I think you would have at least some degree of practical skills involved in that as well. Whereas the conceptual would be the theory behind what you're using there. Yes, that's correct. So their math would be, in a sense, a practical skill, but the theory behind the math would be something like a minimal or an optimal structure in the conceptual. And I have to reiterate something once again. So there's a sense in which everything I'm talking about within this blue circle is all conceptual, which can be confusing because I'm talking about skills, and I'm talking about our immediate responses to things. Our immediate responses to things will actually physically, like biologically, be happening in the yellow circle had I drawn it here. And if I had, it would just be, it would look like the gray circle, only it would be a little bit higher on the screen. And I should have just drawn it in. I wasn't 100% sure on it, that's why I didn't draw it in. But I'm apparently going with it because I haven't changed my mind yet. So that means what you're looking at when you look at the blue circle is you're looking at our concept of the practical, our concept of a skill, our concept of what we are doing immediately. Okay. Whew. I think I've just about talked about everything on this. Is there anything you have questions about? Further elaborations on? Anything?
No, it actually makes sense. I mistook analogical for analytical for a minute, and that confused me.
Okay.
That actually makes more sense if you're working from the structures or categories from intuition.
Yes.
Then it's statistical feelings such that you're creating analogies from one thing to another to try and relate them to each other.
Right.
Which is purely in the mind rather than the external sensing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the practical skill crescent would also correspond with art, wouldn't it not?
I think so, yes. Now, of course, artists sometimes make artist statements, and I went to school for art, so I happen to know something about it, at least. They read reviews from critics, or at least they used to, before the postmoderns hit, and now everything's postmodern, or at least in higher educational levels. Well, I guess they still read theory, but it doesn't matter as much as long as you're postmodern. Sorry, my little bit of my bitterness at postmodernity taking over the art world. But anyway, the theory would be on that conceptual side, and then the practical skill level. There's our concept of technique. You know, when you describe technique in a class or when you read it in a book. That's in the blue circle, but when you're actually doing the artwork, that will be in the yellow circle. Does that make sense?
Not quite sure there.
Oh, okay.
It's not completely devoid of the intuition, but it's still working from the sensing and feeling side. That would still make sense.
Okay. I think that's accurate. So, again, I don't like the term intuition as it's relating to Myers-briggs and Jung, because there is our faculty of intuition, which is emerging from the yellow circle to inform us as these kind of, to me, they almost feel like shapes. When I'm doing philosophy, I'll get an intuition of something missing out of a shape. And when something's missing, then I try to figure out what fills that shape so that I have a complete and accurate map of what I'm talking about. What's that?
It sounds like it relates to the forms again, like forms versus particulars. I think that's Pluto and Aristotle, I believe.
Right. Sure.
Original.
Yeah. I mean, forms are Plato. Aristotle is categories, but they're basically the same kind of idea. And so, again, with the forms, we are talking about, on the one hand, we're talking about a concept. On the other hand, we are talking about something metaphysical. And in a third sense, we could be talking about our intuitions about forms and about categories. So you have the concept, you have the intuition, which is the yellow circle, and you have I lost myself. You have the concept, you have the intuition, you have the concept of the intuition, which sounds confusing, but we have the intuition and we name the intuition. And when we name the intuition, unless we are bringing it fully into a singular relationship to other things, no, that's not quite right. That's not quite right. If we name the intuition, okay, there's two ways of naming things. You can name something in a singular linear logical structure, which would occur on the top half of this, in this language area, or we can embed something into a story. And I mean, I realize I have this red story in the middle, but that's not where that story basically emerges from the right processing, the bottom quadrant, bottom half. I mean, it's that it overlaps everything because it is a story that should overlap everything. Maybe it doesn't, but it still emerges from the bottom of this map. as a product of the right brain, if you will. So if I'm talking about the forms, or if I'll stick with the forms for now. I can have the concept of the form. I can have the intuition of the form bubbling up from the yellow circle, from our intuitions, from those conceptual structures. Or I can have a story of what the forms are. Something like, I suppose, with the cave, I guess the cave analogy doesn't have anything to do with the forms. I don't remember what work Plato wrote to describe the forms, so maybe there's not one. But am I getting any closer there? Or
relational between
you're breaking up.
The forms themselves are kind of like the categories have relations that are definable. Forms don't necessarily, and then so you recognize forms through similarity from a particular state, but then you feel that something is missing from it because it's not a perfect chair. There's no such thing as a perfect metal. There's something distinguishing one from the other, and then that's where you have the other stuff. Yeah,
I think that's right. That sounded really good. Yes. I can tell I need to put the yellow circle in this. I wasn't certain, but as we've gone through this conversation, I've become more and more certain of it. I'll go ahead and...
Make it orange. I can barely see it.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
On the lower right, I
can
barely see it.
Okay. Good suggestion. Thank you. I'll go through two more things. One is, again, do I want to talk about that? I probably already said this, but with the holistic faculty, which I'm corresponding to feeling in the Myers-briggs Jungian model, I'm suggesting that those are not just the emotions but the intuitions, and then of course the intuition on the logical faculty, according to Jung, is abstraction, which is why it's in the logical. Okay, so then I have this square at the bottom left that says locus of action. Oh, I remember what the other thing I was going to say. Okay, anyway, that is pointing here because, and it would actually be more appropriate for it to point there on the yellow circle, because the idea is that when you're sensing the now, all your actions are happening in the now. Your sensing is coming in, whatever you do that you choose to do is going out. So there's this locus of action there because you are making choices there in your mind, and then those choices are being categorized in the blue circle and in the yellow circle. You have impulses coming out of the yellow circle. You have your thinking that you're doing, and you're remembering, all those kind of things. And then the other thing that's kind of cool is that it looks to me that the 4 quadrants, at least, kind of map, or not 4 quadrants, I'm sorry, 4 faculties, those smaller circles, map onto the brain in a way. If you look at this map as looking up from below a brain, because I don't have it oriented in the right way for you to go bottom down, you could think of the now as the spinal column, because that is where the now is interacting with the rest of our brain. You can think of the singular as the right brain, or the left brain, as I've actually already mapped there, holistic as the right brain, and the logical as the frontal lobe, where we do all our higher functions. So I don't think that necessarily means that there's a story in the middle of our head, or that there's this triangle or this diamond of human social interactions or anything like that. I'm just saying that those 4 faculties appear to map pretty well onto the brain. And with that, I think I've gone through everything. Does that sound right?
It does. I am kind of curious as to the Myers-briggs. You notice you've got intuition, sensing, and then feeling and thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so then what's the next measure of the Myers-briggs?
Oh, okay. So those are the four faculties, and then the four faculties are either introverted or extroverted. And there's this weird, so like, oh, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there's a sense in which if your sensing is external, if that's your primary, so it goes sorry, there's your primary and your secondary faculties. There's actually four. There's your primary, your secondary, your, I don't remember what the other two are called, but they're low level. You hardly use them unless you're a very individuated individual who has fully explored your shadow and has done your animus and anima work and all that. But if you haven't done much self-aware work, then you're pretty much stuck using your primary and sometimes your secondary faculties. And your primary will be, if your primary is external focused, extroverted, then your secondary will be introverted. And then there's this weird flip-flop where your tertiary and your third and fourth ones, I can't remember how that works. They also flip-flop, but it's in a different way, I think. That gets deeply into the Myers-briggs, which is a completely another topic. But does that make sense why I don't have primary, secondary, and intuitive or introverted, extroverted on this map? Because those are...
yeah. It seems like, at least like from the sensing to thinking about it to forming the intuition from it to feeling and working from the intuition and then sensing again, which is basically detecting the surprise. It's kind of like a very clockwise way of looking at the operation of the internal and external interacting.
That's interesting. Okay.
But there are.
Well, I think that depends on your personality. Yes, it's kind of your personality type. So, like, if you're, oh, geez, here, let me just bring something up real quick. INTJ stack, function stack. So function stack is kind of the new way to look at the Myers-briggs. Instead of INTJ, you describe it with the function stack, which gives you a, let's see if this is a good website for this. I didn't have anything ready for this. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah, this is a good map. Just so you know, here, I'll copy it into Discord real quick so you know what website I'm looking at. Yeek, what's going on with this? I need to hit this little button and then go like, come on, paste. There we go, paste. Oops, did I paste it twice? I did paste it twice. Okay, that's the website I'm looking at. There's a nice diagram there. That's got orange circles and other things. So an INTJ begins with their intuition, and it's introverted intuition. So when something new happens, the first faculty they go to is they check their abstract models, because intuition again is not yellow circle. It's well, maybe it is yellow circle, but it's in that quadrant. I think there is a way in which the ideas in the blue circle map onto the yellow circle. I'm just not sure. But it goes to that intuiting part because that's the dominant. And if the intuition can't handle it, then it goes to the auxiliary, and the INTJ personality type will then think about the issue. And then if they are in very dire straits, or if they're doing a lot of self-examination, then they will jump to the feeling function. And I should describe the introverted versus extroverted. So it's introverted intuition, it's extroverted thinking, which actually means you are ordering your environment. You're like making sure everything is nice and tucked together. So if your intuitions go, if your intuitive reaction would probably be something like, that's out of order, I've got to put it in order. So if you're a manager, you're trying to get all your people to do exactly what you want them to do because you're an INTJ and you're trying to control them. And then, but at the very last thing you're going to do, or almost the very last thing you're going to do, is you might, especially if you're a well individuated person, is you'll check your feelings, which means the kind of the yellow circle as it comes up from below, from the holistic. Gosh, that's interesting. I haven't quite thought about it through this, but it's making a lot of sense actually. I think it's revealing some more work that I have to do. And then finally, your inferior. Go ahead.
Would the yellow and blue intersection on intuition have to do with like your fears, but also your awareness of your uncertainty of your intuition?
Would it have to do with your fears? I don't think so. Not for an INTJ. Feelings literally.
I see the Myers-briggs as ignoring fear as a factor.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because fear can trigger a fight or flight, which means that you're looking for the most optimal path.
Okay.
It would trigger intuition rather than thinking about something. For example, you're just like running, and then the big fight.
Well, keep in mind, intuition in this graph does not mean what we. It's not the intuition of what I should do. Intuition is an abstraction. It's a generalization. It's very confusing. I wish they didn't do that. But intuition doesn't
derive our course of action from our understanding.
Yes. But okay. Sorry, maybe I'm the one getting confused by you using the term intuition.
Well, I mean, intuition, like if you sense a fear or a threat,
which is feeling,
you don't stop and think like always what kind of threat of this is this. Like if a bear is coming at you, you just like run or do something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But you're not always working in a rational thinking manner doing that. You're working from your simplified internal model, which I would put in the intuition category.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So like, if the Myers-Briggs is accurate, which I don't think it, I'm not convinced it fully is. I just think it's a helpful model. Like, so if an INTJ personality type runs into a bear, their intuition faculty, Myers-Briggs intuition faculty, is not going to have much to say. There's not much of a model there. So it's going to drop all the way back to this tertiary thing of feeling, and it's going to feel the fear, and he's just going to pack and freak out. He's not going to be able to think and do ordering, externalized ordering, and he's, oh gosh, but it is an introverted feeling. Never mind. And the intuition then would be, maybe once he finally gets himself under control a little bit, his intuition is still going to be flooded by this fight or flight mechanism that you're describing. Does that sound right to you, or are you making a critique of that?
Well, I mean, he could be paralyzed in thinking too, and just suffer the paralyzation instinct. I don't think it would necessarily apply to a specific personality. I mean, the Myers-Briggs does not incorporate any kind of consciousness of fear, whereas the Big Five actually seem to accidentally incorporate it.
Oh, interesting.
Like the openness, like so. Sensing is more associated with the right political theory in the Myers-Briggs, and intuition is associated with the left. But then in the Big Five, openness is associated with the left, and openness is like you're open to new things, so you're not afraid of trying new things.
Right.
The opposite of that on the Big Five is conscientiousness. Well, it's not. They're not opposites. You can actually have both. So conscientiousness is like you're thinking about what the consequences will occur. So it's not the same as sensing, but the Big Five incorporates the assumption of fear processing into its model, presumably unintentionally.
Okay, I think that makes sense to me. I'll have to listen to that again later on and think about it. But yeah, I think that's making sense. It seems to be then. So when you say it doesn't incorporate fear, do you mean explicitly? Like it's not like it acts as if fear doesn't exist. It just doesn't have a a, a cable, a line of data where you can observe fear running. Does that sound correct?
Since they're both statistical models, I don't think the questions for the Myers-Briggs have implicitly fear questions in them. Whereas in the Big 5, the question
Okay.
of fear versus trying new things or consequences is in the question. Implicit.
Okay. Okay. I see what you're saying. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So where would you? Let me think. How do I want to ask this question? Because I've in our conversations I've heard you describing how fear works before. I think a little bit at least, and so I'm wondering. Well, I guess I'm just going to have to map out what I mean by the yellow circle. I guess I might have to make a map similar to what I've done with the blue circle for the yellow circle, because I think fear and a lot of those other mechanisms like that. See, it's confusing to me because it's not like the right brain is the only one that produces emotions. The left brain produces like anger, aspects of anger, and aspects of certainty, and I'm not sure which other emotions. I don't know. I don't know enough about those things, honestly.
Yeah, our models are not conflicting. Like the Tau model that I use, they're related.
Mm-hmm.
So like the ROD, resistance optimization disposition,
Mm-hmm.
is related to the motivation to use intuition or sensing, for example, in the environment. So ROD tends to lean towards left ideology.
Okay.
But it generally is they're looking for an optimal path to a solution, so they resort to intuition first. And then the SOD, surprise optimization disposition, is they are working from the sensing position typically, where they're sensing the environment and they're trying to avoid surprise, like temperature changes, things from simply that, or like as you start pushing the sensing and intuition closer together, or get towards the closer to the center circle, like on the right side, you start getting predictive intuition, where the intuition isn't just statistical to categorize things, but you understand relationships enough in order to not be surprised by the outcome. And then if you are surprised by the outcome, somebody who's on the left more might try and force they might try to force the environment to conform to what they have, maybe, but on the right they would reform their internal model, trying to avoid being surprised. It gets a little queasy because both traits are not bad. It's just that's why pride and humility is on that scale, which is partially subconscious. It's like a conscious but subconscious thing.
Okay.
So like, if you're sensing and trying to avoid surprise, you might avoid anything that changes, which would be a typical critique of conservatism, for example, on the right. But if you are less you might try to form predictive models of your environment that let you go with the flow, for example, which would be moving more towards a holistic point of view of the sensing and intuition. Because you're using intuition, but you're developing your intuition through thought and recognizing its insufficiency in order to predict and surprise you. So you're questioning yourself in order to produce a better, more accurate view of the world, while still trying to optimize your resistance to the world, because you're trying to go with the flow or optimize your outcome. So it's related to what you're doing, but it's not. They're not. They're addressing different aspects of. Not even different aspects, really. They're connected, but not. They don't include.
Yeah, I think that's correct. The thing about this map I've been working on, honestly, all I think it really gives you is something like a Gestalt snapshot of things. I don't think it's. I've tried to actually use it to come to a conclusion, and it doesn't seem to work that way. It seems to be more like something you look at, and then so you go, oh, I see. That's how everything works together, and then perhaps, hopefully, that helps you down the line when you're trying to see how things work together. You know, like I talk a lot about what I call the importance of looking at completeness and accuracy. And the idea there is that if you have a concept, or what I call a category in this context, it's basically your terms for that concept and your definition. And your definition is going to be made up of many other terms, which will then, of course, have their own definitions. And those definitions will be made up of their terms that have definitions, and on and on. But you want each term to be complete, meaning you want to have everything that's relevant to that concept in it, and you want it to be accurate so that it's all correctly related together. And this blue map I'm trying to describe here is an expansion on that idea. It's like once you have all your concepts in your mind kind of defined together, or maybe you've done it using a database, and you're using this blue model to define your database. You can look at all your data in this way. Like there's no data that doesn't fall on that circle. That's kind of the goal, which is I don't know how you use that to make predictions. Actually, it's just more of a systems analysis level. Does that make sense?
I think it's I like it. It's kind of like trying to bring to the forefront like your tacit knowledge or memory.
Mm-hmm.
What you know that you don't know you know, like
yes.
hand movements and your ability to describe things without thinking about how you're describing them, just to try to just the output of the description,
mm-hmm.
Or the doing of the thing, and then bring that forward into the consciousness so that you could evaluate when you run into a weakness. So if like you're trying to do the practical and you keep overthinking it, you're going in the opposite direction. And it's to bring it back to it's to make yourself more, not self-conscious just in the questioning sense, but more so self-aware.
Yes, I think that's what this is trying to do as much as anything else. At least that has been my goal, is to be more self-aware. I think that's why I've made it, is I was trying to be more self-aware of how thinking is structured and how it relates to the other parts of the mind, so to speak. Okay.
I think you described it very well.
Well, good. I'm glad this worked out then. I've had people take a glance at this and go, okay, this I think this is good, and then all of a sudden do a 180 and be like, what? Why'd you do it this way? This doesn't make sense, and just kind of tear it apart because I wasn't able to, I guess, give them a snapshot of what everything there means. I'm not sure why it didn't work out, but anyway.
It might be, like I said, the illusion of a clockwise process.
Ah, interesting.
In
Okay.
thinking, where they tried to relate it to their own, which was different.
Mm.
And that may be an aspect of yourself that's in this.
Okay. That would be interesting. It would be interesting to say if I don't know what Myers-briggs I actually am. I've had a real hard time typing myself. But it'd be interesting if I oriented this according to to my personality type. But anyway, that would just be entertaining.
Yeah, it still lacks, I mean...
Yeah, what would you say it lacks?
Introvert and extrovert.
Yes.
And the judging and perceiving, but that falls more on the, on the certainty. That's like the yellow connected to the blue thing.
Yeah, your judging and your perceiving is actually it's strange. It actually tells your how do I describe it? It tells you which of your faculties is primary and which is secondary. So if you're judging, shoot, I don't remember how it goes. If you're a judging, then that means either your intuition or your feeling is your primary faculty, and if it's an in, then that means it's your intuition rather than your feeling, because judging is intuitive feeling, and sensing is, or not sensing, perceiving is thinking, sensing. I think that's right. Maybe I reversed it. It's
intuition and sensing are the second.
I don't remember. I'm sorry. For some reason, when I learn things, I generally get a good intuitive grasp for them first, and then I have to work really, really hard to nail down the particulars. And this is something I spent about 4 weeks trying to learn and still haven't completely learned, so I haven't memorized how all the parts work. So even though I've tried to utilize it in my system, I can't claim I know that much about it, because I have a good intuition of it sometimes, but when I go to speak about it specifically, it falls apart and I don't remember what I'm supposed to say.
Oh, no, yeah, I don't mean that. I think a lot of the personality predictive stuff off the Myers-briggs is people trying to apply predictive order to it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
I'm not sure how the perceiving versus judging affects the thing you're talking about. It's just a statistical model.
Okay. All right.
But
yeah.
Yours is actually more predictive in that sense by removing those, in the sense that, like, because you have your crescents. And so if you are from a particular perspective on these groups or quadrants, then you can kind of tell what you're having trouble with, or by trouble with, you can determine which quadrant you're in and which one you should try to be moving into.
Okay.
So it's actually probably more functional in that there's like the personality groupings of the Myers-briggs, which are kind of interesting, but I don't. They might kind of relate. Like,
wow. I think you're able to see this more broadly than I'm able to. Even though I'm the one that made it, there's things about it that I don't know how to map onto it yet, or else they'd probably be there. And so it sounds like
you did map, though.
Oh, you think so? Okay. Wow.
That's what your crescents are.
Well, I mean, they're I think of the crescents as particular ways in which our mind analyzes the data at hand. But it sounds like you're suggesting they also relate to something like a grouping of personality types.
Yeah, it's protectors, creators, intellectuals, and visionaries.
Hey, I gotta give my son a hug. He's been gone for a week. Come here, buddy. I know, I shaved my face. Good to see you, man. Goodness.
I see you.
Yeah, I'm trying to do a video right now, so you'll be making your YouTube debut, I guess.
I think that's probably a good place to leave off, actually.
I think you're right.
We could do more. I'll send you a spreadsheet with that. So
Okay.
that you can look at it. It's just the Myers-briggs breakdown of some things, but you might like it.
Okay, cool. I'd like to look at that. What's that, bud? Yeah, Mommy's done a good job, hasn't she? All right, I think I gotta let you go. I gotta do father duty.
Okay, I did record it.
Okay, cool.
This is the backup for yours.
Perfect.
So the video
Cool.
is all screwed up.
Sure.
Because I was jumping around, but
Okay.
if you need it, something's wrong with yours, just let me know and I'll send it.
Okay. Sounds perfect. All right.
Have a good time.
Yeah, really good to talk to you. Take care.